give me your take about this news that Mark Hurd will take a leave of absence. What is your reaction?
Well, my reaction first and most important is for, as Larry Ellison said, a speedy recovery for Mark. I think he's in my thoughts and prayers. And if you really think about the team of Larry Ellison, Safra Catz, Mark Hurd, they work more effectively than almost anybody envisioned that a threesome would work. But Larry and Safra have worked together for, I don't know, 25 years. And I know all three of them very, very well. Safra is world-class, off the charts. Larry has always been involved in the strategy, the vision, the engineering side of the house, and I think they'll navigate through this one. I don't think they'll have any major issues at all. They've got a deep company, a lot of capabilities, and as I said, Larry and Safra are world-class leaders that are very actively involved, and my thoughts are with Mark for a speedy recovery.
Yeah, John, talk to me more about your relationship with Mark Hurd during Cisco and then his time at Oracle. How was that relationship?
Well, the relationships with Oracle and HP have always been very strong for me. I have a lot of confidence in HP. They helped me when I first moved out to Silicon Valley understand the Valley when I only had 400 people at Cisco, and people got us confused with a food truck company. And Lou Platt there helped a great deal. Their new CEO, Antonio, is amazingly good, and I have a lot of confidence in the direction of HP, and Meg did a nice job on the turnaround. In terms of Safra and Larry, I've always been very, very close to them, both on political issues in terms of positioning tech for good in the world, and they're very, very strong leaders. I would always bet on Larry and Safra and Mark together, and I'd bet on Larry and Safra in the interim, and they've got a deep team. So as an investor, I think they'll navigate through this one very well.
John, another big story that we continue to monitor continues to be the U.S.-China trade fight and tariffs. We haven't quite seen it show up or impact the bottom line of companies. Where are you seeing the impact of tariffs the most?
Well, remember again that I'm not in any way associated with Cisco. That company, when I left, it was important their leadership run the company and that I wasn't looking over their shoulder in any way. And I've been in China for 30 years, understand the market extremely well. And I think one of your prior colleagues said it well. For enterprise business, I think the impact is going to be fairly small, enterprise-type companies. If you're in service provider or government, that might be a little bit different. Supply chain people are going to have to work through. However, taking the step backwards, there needed to be a resolution in the trade unbalance between the U.S. and China, a $570 billion number versus $140 billion. And we have to treat American companies in China fairly like we treat Chinese companies here. And I think that needed to be resolved. And while all of us wish it would be a little bit smoother in the resolution, it was something that had to occur. We had to stop kicking the can down the highway and not dealing with the issues. If you want to look at one that is going well, and in my opinion, handling it right, the U.S.-India trade issues. If you watch what President Trump and Prime Minister Modi, both of them are heavily involved in that. Both of them are taking very much constructive roles on how do you get our countries working together. And as I've said several times on your all show, I think the most important strategic relationship between any two countries in the world for the U.S. is the U.S. and India. I very much admire Prime Minister Modi. I will see him later this month in New York with other CEOs. So there's a model of one that I think is going in the right direction, and I'm cautiously optimistic you'll see that type of trade issue resolved effectively there.
John, I want to talk about the elasticity of these supply chains. Come into my terminal here at GTV Go. I will use Cisco as an example, knowing that you are no longer directly involved. And we take a look at the suppliers. And frankly, a lot of these big tech companies have big exposure to China. Talk to me about elasticity. Can we start to automatically move to India, like you said, to Vietnam? How quickly can you do that?
It takes time, and I think the time to move to India or Mexico or other sources or to balance your supply chain takes multiple years to do. You can't do it quickly. India is in the very early stages of Prime Minister Modi's digital manufacturing focus, and I think they're making very solid progress on it, but that takes time to really do. So for these companies, they have to do it very carefully. All of them focus on supply chain and understanding it, and it's in everybody's everybody's best interest that the supply chain work very effectively during both the good times and when there's a little bit of constructive give and take in terms of challenges.
John, how healthy is the IPO market right now?
I think it's very healthy. And this is a great question because when you ask that question, you're really asking 3 or 4 questions. The first is for jobs in the U.S., in terms of the future, large companies will cut dramatically their headcount due to automation, artificial intelligence, digitization, etc. So it's so important that our startup economy and IPO market go well because 75% of the headcount that companies add are after they become unicorns or after they do an IPO in the marketplace. So the pipeline looks good, but I'd like to see us double that over the next 3 to 5 years. I think there'll be some IPOs that will dramatically outperform the market. There'll be some that miss on that. And the only input that I would have to investors, but also the companies going public, I think it's so important as you do this to have a very clear path to profitability and a very clear path to cash flow positive. And for the 18 companies that I'm providing guidance to, and hopefully we'll bring a number of them public, even on your all show and talk about them, they'll have a very clear path to profitability and free cash flow. In fact, most of them will be profitable and free cash flow well before we take them public. So I think that's the one caveat I'd watch as an investor.
So, John, talk to me about that. I want to come back in my terminal here at GTV Go. 2 things you just said struck me. One, free cash flow positive and looking for profitability. One could argue Beyond Meat has a path to profitability and being free cash flow positive. They are trading right near around the average analyst price target of a 150. And second, your point on sort of alternative meats, if you will, or alternative food sources. Walk me through some of the startups that you like and why you're bullish on alternative food sources.
All right. So first of all, I think it's very important to have alternative food sources given the challenges that we have purely on agricultural production and meat production. You're already taking up the equivalent of all of Africa and the equivalent of all of Latin America just in geographic area that's needed to do this with tremendous damage to the environment in terms of the meat sources. So the ability to think about alternatives to meat are very important. I have to, in full disclosure, share with your viewership that I bet big time on a company in terms of crickets being one of the next forms of protein. The cleanest form, Spare Foods, Mohammed, the CEO there, is doing an amazing job. And I think people realize with Beyond Meat that you can not only produce very good products here that have equally as good quality protein, but you can do it with less damage to the environment, and they taste pretty good and very likely be better for your health. So I'm betting if Beyond Meat, I would bet on crickets as the next form of protein. And so I think ag tech is probably the least overhyped area.